Hello, everybody. We're moving on to our next lecture. These two lectures are about some videos, so make sure you watch those. If you're watching this one, sorry, give me 1 second. What is this? If you are watching this video in particular, it means that you have already watched the two videos that are listed here in the front screen, the Thug Logic Chef Nice and Adam Crapser videos. Please, again, make sure you watch these videos. Okay. So real quickly, make sure you check the announcements to make sure there's nothing due. And we will have, well, for most classes, you will have, well, we'll talk. Check the announcements. Check the announcements. You have all the information there. Okay. So real quickly, for our class, we will have the midterm exam coming up. The midterm exam will be 90 minutes, hour and a half, basically, the time for a class period. There will be 20 multiple choice questions worth half a point each, and then 4 short answer questions worth 2.5 points each. This is 90 minutes. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward, right? You're gonna have 20 multiple choice questions. That's going to be worth 10 points total, and you have 4 short answer questions. Those are going to be also worth 10 points total. Okay. Now, obviously, as you can tell, the short answer questions are worth a lot more points, so make sure you spend enough time on those particular questions. Okay. In order to study for this, there will be, or there has been, a study guide posted. Look for answers in the PowerPoint within stuff that we've already done. And then a quick video review will be posted. All right. So keep that in mind. If you have any questions about the exam, just, feel free to shoot me an email. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. So again, these are the videos in case you didn't already watch them. Doug's Left Chef Knife and 41-year-old adoptee deported after 37 years in the United States. That is the Adam Crapser video. Okay. So, obviously in class you have reaction responses. A lot of people enjoy these two videos. I think that for a little context, it's important to know that this is a very interesting problem that exists in America, right? And when we're talking about people without citizenship, right? We're talking about people in this case that, at least for Adam and Diablo, who did not fill out their whatever that adoption form was for them to become naturalized citizens. And for them to go back to Korea, to get sent back to Korea, is a very, very difficult situation because they've spent literally their whole lives over here, right? Yeah, it's just such a crazy thing because imagine spending your whole life somewhere and then having to go back to, a place you're completely unfamiliar with. Um, I think too that it's important to note, right, that this is actually kind of a thing. Like it's not just those two. There were as mentioned in the Adam Crapser video, there were other people that have similar situations. Um, and it comes up because quite honestly, a lot of times in life, especially when you're growing up in circumstances that aren't the best, right? You're not really, this isn't really on your mind. There's not people looking around like, hey, what's your citizenship? You know what I mean? Anyways, okay, so how do race and ethnicity nationality play into Dee and Adam's life? Let's talk about the biggest one first, nationality, right? Their nationality is technically Korean, unfortunately. If it wasn't Korean, they wouldn't have this issue, right? If their nationality was American, they would be, still be here. Now when we talk about nationality, that's their legal status, their legal citizenship, unfortunately, because their adopted parents did not fill out that form, is Korean. And so that's how that played out, and that's why they got deported, right? Their ethnicity and race is very interesting, right? Because it's not as clear. Okay, their race is Asian, that's pretty clear. But what's their ethnicity, right? Their cultural heritage, they would also be described as Korean technically. And the reason why I use this example in particular is because if you were to describe their cultural background as Korean, that really would give you no understanding of their culture at all, right? Because they weren't raised in Korean culture. So how would they? So basically, the description of them being Korean is not very helpful. Okay. So how is race, ethnicity, nationality constructing our minds? So when we think about our ethnicity, right, what are we really talking about? Because if ethnicity is supposed to, it has the function of trying to be more specific in describing your cultural background. And while I know it's not a terrible definition, remember, again, if you remember the jelly beans, right? Nationality is the bag of jelly beans, race is the color, and then ethnicity is the flavor. When you're talking about the flavor and you're saying that that's your cultural heritage, your what's it called? Yeah, your cultural heritage. Um, you know, that changes over time, right? So like for example, and I think I gave these examples in previous lectures as well. A black family from Jamaica that moved here 2 years ago and lived in Flatbush is very different from a black family that's lived in Atlanta for 5 generations, right? Their experiences are very different. But ethnically, they might still be the same, right? Um, or I'll use it better by myself. I'm a Chinese American, but my parents grew up here, right? I would say, pretty American. And yes, do I do things that are Chinese? Absolutely. But my ethnicity would be the same as someone that came from China just 2 years ago. And I feel like, no, sorry, I don't feel like that is extremely different in terms of understanding their background. And I am someone that at least has, like my parents still do some things that are, Chinese, and I still do some that are Chinese, and so you can kind of trace it back. But for people like Diablo and Adam, where there's no trace of Korean upbringing, where does that play in? What is ethnicity really describing for them? It's not really describing anything. Okay. So what does this say about our understanding of race? Think about our in terms of the self and of society, right? So one of the biggest things about race is that we base race off of what? Physicality, right? Your physical appearance. Apparently, you're supposed to base ethnicity off of your cultural heritage, but is that done like enough? Or is that, sorry, one, in this case, is it an accurate depiction of their background? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, right? Especially in places, in situations like Diablo and Adam, it really doesn't describe their situation. In examples like myself, it kind of does, kind of doesn't, right? And, even when you say the word, for example, American, like, let's say your ethnicity is American, which is no one ever says that, but let's say you are. Someone that grows up in New York City versus someone that grows up in Texas versus someone that grows up in California are going to have very different backgrounds and ways of doing things. So it's very interesting when we think about race, ethnicity, and nationality. You really have to ask yourself, um, what do we really think about when we're asking for these issues or for this information, right? What is it really describing? And ultimately, it's describing some stuff, and for many cases, it might be somewhat accurate or somewhat insightful, but a lot of times it's not. Okay, so what does it say about our understanding of race? Think about our in terms of the self and of society. Who is the self? Who is society? How does this change when adopted? Why? What context matters? Okay, yeah. So basically, what I'm talking about here, right, is that when we think about our nationality, right, which I'm assuming for many of us is pretty clear, right, where your citizenship is. Now, why does that change when you're adopted? How does it change anything when you're adopted from a different, for example, from a different country, such as this, right? The reason why I'm asking that question is because does it actually really change, or does it change based off of our own racial perception? So basically, what I'm asking is, yes, Diablo and Adam's life has changed significantly, but if I were to tell you that their nationality, their legal citizenship, just by looking at them, were Korean, would you be surprised? No, right? Even if you heard them speak, right? And we didn't know anything about the background, you would not be surprised if I said your nation if I said their nationality was Korean. However, if there was a someone that was white or black and you asked them like, "Oh, what's your nationality?" They said Korean, you'd be a little surprised, right? Why is that? It's because our understandings of race and our understanding of ethnicity and everything like that comes from, unfortunately, what we see, right? It comes from our physical attributes. And so even though these other definitions with ethnicity and nationality are well intentioned and they have definitions that are supposed to give us more information on people that we're trying to analyze. It doesn't always accurately depict what's actually going on in the background, right? We are basing it largely off of what we see racially. Now, for example, if you are in the Bronx and you use the race Hispanic, you automatically are probably thinking about either Dominican or Puerto Rican people. Well, nowadays there's also quite a few Mexican people in New York, but just speaking Dominican and Puerto Rican. If you say the word Hispanic in Miami, you're probably thinking about Cuban people. If you say the word Hispanic in California, you're probably thinking about Mexican people or South American people. Even though this is the same race, it is completely different depending where you're in America. And so when someone is looking at statistics, for example, and it says the word Hispanic, they're not thinking about or if they're in California, they're not thinking about Dominican, Puerto Ricans, or Cubans. And likewise, in the Bronx, they're not really thinking about so much of Mexicans or El Salvadorians or Ecuadorians. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's why this is so important, is because when you break down what do we really base people off of, right? Yeah, superficially, of course, your physical appearance is going to be Asian, but how does that play for their ethnicity and nationality? What things are surprising, what things are not? It really depends on what we're used to and what we're not used to. Okay. So another thing I want you to really keep in mind is the definition of culture. Now, a lot of people are going to talk about, Mexican culture, American culture, and Korean culture. And while those things are important, we have to also understand that the cultural systems that really affected Adam and Diablo's life are the systems listed here, right? The foster care system, public education system, justice system, immigration system. Now, it's not this has nothing to do with it being good or bad. I really don't believe in good or bad at all anyway. But when we talk about a machine, right? Remember we talked about machine with the women working in World War II? That is a system that changed because women started working. Now, let me go through how some of these things might change. So all these things, right? All these things, these systems, only exist in the way they do in America. If you were to go outside of America, these systems would be very different, right? So foster care system, public aid system, justice system. Let's start with the easy one, foster care system. I don't know if you remember, but when the foster mother of Adam was talking to the Vice News people, she was under the impression that Adam was being taken care of, right? She thought he was doing well. Now, what's really interesting though is that there's a rule, and it makes sense. There's a rule where if you are fostering this student, or sorry, student, if you're fostering this kid and the kid gets adopted, you can't contact the kid. And there's good reason for that. It's because sometimes, foster parents might be too attached and they wanted to adopt the kid, they weren't given the chance to, whatever, right? But if that one rule was different, Adam's life could have been completely different, right? And again, not I mean, in this case, it would have been for the better, but in other cases, this rule is kind of important. But again, these rules are dictating how these things are kind of affecting the lives of Diablo and Adam, right? And of course, for the foster care system, this kind of plays into the justice system as well, right? The way that they have to go back and forth and adopt with different families and stuff like that, like the penalties, right, that exist for people who are abusive to children, families, all that stuff. This is very different, right? If did not go through the foster system, they would not be in the same situation that they'd be in today. Sorry, if they didn't go through the foster system in America, right, then their whole lives would be very different. Again, not for better, not for worse, but it just is different. Public education system, right? Diablo talked about how he got into gangs and stuff in school and had to fight this and fight that. Again, if he went to school in a different place, like if he was adopted by a family maybe in China or adopted by a family in Mexico, this would be a completely different situation. Again, not better or worse, just different. The justice system, right? The rule that you have to, for example, fill out Oh no, so, well, actually, sorry. Well, that goes more in the context. Let's have a different one. The penalty of committing certain crimes and then being deported, right? That is something that is again, very specific to America, right? And you might say, oh, other governments will deport people. Absolutely, but what are the frameworks for that? Like, what is considered a crime to be deported for? If you remember in specifically Adam's case was like dormant, like Adam was just living his life, and then he wanted to expand his business, and then all of a sudden now he's being deported. Okay. So, well, also what I was talking about earlier, foster care system, the fact that if you adopt someone overseas, you need to fill out this adoption paperwork is another example of, again, a rule, just a small rule within all these systems that really, really affected the lives of Diablo and Adam. And finally, immigration system, what we just talked about, right? The ability or the necessity to fill out this form in order for you to be a naturalized citizen, the system of unfortunately, like, the justice system not looking kindly upon people who are not citizens, the again the form that they fill out for them to become citizens, whatever it is, right? The main point about I'm trying to make about all these things is that even though everyone's going to be focusing on kind of like them being Mexican or American or Korean, it's not really about that. That's just the superficial stuff. When we think about what really affected their lives, these things affected their lives deeply, very, very deeply. And again, it doesn't mean that it's going to be better or worse, right? Um, it doesn't mean it's gonna be better or worse, but it does mean it's gonna be different. Does that make sense? And these things are dictate, or sorry to say dictate. These things have really had a great effect on the lives of both Diablo and Adam. Okay. All right. So again, people emphasize Diablo being Mexican or Adam being American. Are these realities? Why is it that we view them this way? The cultural factors in the previous slide are distinctive to the United States. Deportation, education, jail, foster care system only look like this in the United States. Adam Diablo's experience does not really reflect the purposes of these systems, but are the unintended cultural results, right? So again, like, similar to the woman working, having the hot pot or the TV dinner industry explode, right? The ways that these systems have affected Diablo and Adam were not intended to be that way, but they ended up being that way. Okay. So again, it's important to separate popular culture, you know, Americans do this, Mexicans do that, Koreans do this, from anthropological definition of culture, which is basically the kind of everything that's learned, right? Everything that you're existing in. Because again, what the reason why I put those down as really important emphases on their cultural background, right, is because without one of these systems, their lives are completely different, like completely different. Think of these things, they don't like remember, culture doesn't tell you what to do, but it creates a framework that you have to exist in, right? And once you exist in that framework, then you are bouncing around trying to figure it out. Okay. So what are some of the cultural challenges that Diablo and Adam face in Korea? Think about living your daily life and how they're different, right? What aspects of their adjustment do we need to consider? Why are these differences important? A lot of students have came up to me, or after watching this video, have been like, "Oh, Diablo is like, he has a good mindset. Adam's kind of like a victim, this and that." I was like, "Yeah, but the circumstances are very different." On even on a superficial level, when did Diablo get deported to Korea? He got deported to Korea at like 18 years old, right? Like, it was very young. When did Adam get deported to Korea? Like when he was freaking 40. Okay. On top of that, for Diablo, right? I don't know if you remember from the interview, but he was kind of looking forward to change. He was kind of looking forward to get away from violence and all this other stuff. Was Adam looking forward to do that? No. Adam had a freaking family. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things going on here that are very different between the two. Let me give you another crazy thing. So Diablo, right? He knows how to cook what? He knows how to cook Mexican food. Let me ask you a crazy question. If he knew how to cook Korean food, do you think he would make it over there in Korea? Nope, definitely not. You think you're gonna cook better Korean food than people in Korea? I don't think so, right? Number two, what does Adam do? Adam cuts hair. Do you think that they would rather go to him or some other dude to cut hair? They probably would go to some other dude, right? So a lot of these things, even though they might seem like they're similar, they're not that similar, right? because the circumstances that they're coming, or sorry, that they're being deported with are very, very different from each other. Okay. So this goes back to that thing we were talking about earlier, right? Where we all have biological urges and they are always modified by culture. It is important to think about culture as something that is comprehensive, not just focused on perceived, very important, geographical differences. Cultural influences in our lives exist in every aspect of our food, or sorry, every aspect of our life, modifying our natural urges. This includes things like sleeping, sex, food, water, bodily waste, or in this case, just living your life. We understand culture through a careful analysis of their day-to-day life. Culture is not a bullet point list, right? So when we talk about Korean people, right, usually people just have this bullet point list. And it's not to say that it's wrong, but it is important to understand culture as this like complete thing. And when you don't talk about it as this complete thing, you're only talking about a very, very small, isolated fragment of it that has probably already changed, right? And so that's why I really like this particular video. The main thing I want to bring up to you, right, is this notion of race, ethnicity, and nationality. When we think about nationality, what is it based off of? Your legal status, right? When we think about race, what is it based off? Your physical features, right? And we think about ethnicity, what is it based off of? Your cultural heritage. That's great. What is the point, though, of ethnicity? The point is to describe a little bit about your ethnic background. Or sorry, a little bit about your cultural background. And for Diablo and Adam, does ethnicity describe their background? Absolutely not. Right? And I just want to, and obviously this is a fun way to present it to you guys, but I want to emphasize that point. In fact, people are more confused if you call them Korean. Or sorry, it would be not confused. People are more, sorry, the description is more inaccurate if you call them Korean because they have no connection to Korean stuff at all. They literally have zero, right? And the stuff they do, the only connection they have are kind of like, you know, random like memories or random things like Adam's like the book he had or the Bible he had and like his shoes or whatever. So it's just like, when we think about ethnicity, what are we really talking about, right? We're talking about cultural heritage, but does that give a great understanding of the person that is, you know, that it's describing? Not all the time. Okay. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. There was, what was the one thing? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay. And more importantly, right, when we're thinking about this, when we're thinking about describing people's cultural backgrounds and we're using things like race, ethnicity, nationality, they're great categories, but you have to understand that they are culturally created, and because they are culturally created, they're not going to fit everybody all the time. Okay. All right, that's a pretty short lecture because I know that the videos are kind of long. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that one. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kvcc.cuny.edu. Oh, all right, guys, have a good one. Probably shut this down.